And welcome everybody else. I'm already feeling like the positive energy from this, so I'm loving this already. Isn't it amazing that even comes through in like a virtual community? So my name is Megan. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher. I'm your host for tonight. I was a former fourth and fifth grade teacher, and now I spend my days advocating for students and teachers, and also thinking about better ways to support student and families with at-home learning, which it looks like we might be doing a little bit more of. But I want to thank you for being a part of our learning community tonight. Just a reminder that we are recording this, and we want to invite all of you to the after hours conversation. So this portion will last about 20 or 30 minutes, and then we know that many of you have busy lives, kids, families, jobs, things like that. So we'll have like a dismissal, but if you want to stick around for an unrecorded conversation, we are here for that. So we're going to do a quick lightning round of introductions, and I've already done mine. That's my professional role. My role as a mama. I have 4 teenage stepkids. Yep. And I usually just pause there. And then I have a 1-year-old, and I will pass the mic to Elizabeth.
Okay, yes, hello, welcome, and thank you for having me, Megan. And actually, Megan is on the board of directors of National Board, which many of you may know that already, and that's our connection. And we also have a Hillsborough County connection, which I love. So I'm really just grateful to be invited. And yes, I'm a mama. I have 2 children. They are grown-ups. One child is on this, they're still children to us though. One child is on with us. She is a graduate of Howard University, and we lived in New York City, so she attended Dalton High School, and that's part of our conversation in our household, and between, Courtney and I usually, is the diversity difference between the 2 schools that she attended. I'm a teacher in Hillsborough County. I work in an elementary school, which I love. I talk about all the time, right, Teresa? And I'm just glad to be here. I'll pass the mic to Jen.
Hi, Jen Matos. I'm an assistant professor at Mount Holyoke College in the Department of Psychology and Education. I work with folks who want to be teachers and bless them in middle, secondary, and the arts. I'm also a former high school teacher. I'm a licensed high school English teacher. The courses I teach at Mount Holyoke are mostly around race and social justice and education, so I love having these conversations. I have 3 humans who are related to me. 2 of them are 7 years old. They're not twins. So there's Anna, currently known as Ita, Emily, who is also 7, and Quincy, who is 9. And the conversations right now, so the thing about my children, they're from 2 different marriages. So Ita is from my first marriage, and Ita's other parent is biologically white. Quincy and Emily are from my second marriage, and their mama, who is on this call, is biologically white. So I am not white, and I'm having really interesting conversations with my children who don't belong to the same race group as I do. In fact, they belong to the dominant group, and talking about race and how what's happening affects me in real time. So those are kind of the conversations that are happening. And I will pass the mic to Lexi.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. I'm Lexi Walters-Wright. I use the pronouns she and her. I am the mama of a 9-year-old, and mic drop. Woo, in this moment, it's a lot of parenting. I feel incredibly lucky to be the owner of a children's bookstore here in Florence, Massachusetts, called High Five Books. I opened High Five just about a year ago. Really, I created this space because we live in an incredible neighborhood that was lacking a bit of a community center for families. And it has been a privilege every single day to work with the families in our area. my background is primarily in writing and editing. I was in publishing for 20 years before I went on to get a master's in information and library science. I'm also a degreed librarian and just basically a book nerd. So I'm really pleased to be here this evening. And my connection to Megan is that her daughter comes into our store all the time, and I get the absolute lovely time of getting to hang out with baby Cora a lot.
Thanks all. So let's jump right in. Jen, Elizabeth, Lexi, what conversations about race are happening right now in your houses?
I know one conversation that happened with Elizabeth about race in her house earlier today.
Oh my gosh, it was such a sweet story.
Do you want me to tell that one or?
Whatever, you know what, this is a very relaxed forum, and
Okay.
anytime we need to take a breath, we can do that. I often invite that, the opportunity.
So I'm Teresa and I have a 9-year-old also. So Lexi, you have my dream job, and I could totally feel you in that moment when you said, yes. So my husband and I are very open. We actually don't use pronouns with him when it comes to who he will be with later on in life. We say, whoever you decide to love, whoever you decide to marry, if you want to get married. My husband is very 100% on board with all of that. It's not like me wrangling him into that, you know. But, you know, so we're very, very open. Elizabeth knows me. She can vouch for that. So we are at a little block party. We have a tiny little street that we live on, and we're doing fireworks on the 4th of July. And one of our friends comes over, and he's Black, his wife is white, and he comes over and he shakes me and my husband's hands, and he tells us we're doing such a good job parenting. And I'm like, oh, thank you. But I was not expecting what happened next. He said that my son said N-I-G-G-A. And I was like, can the ground swallow me up right now? Just swallow me up in this moment. I'm not going to survive this. I'm like hot and sweaty. It's already hot outside. And he goes, no. He goes, I asked him what that meant. And he said, I don't know. And he said, no, Bryce. My son's name is Bryce. He goes, no, Bryce, really, what did that mean? And Bryce was like, I don't know. Another man was there, and he called Lamar that. So Bryce just called him that because he heard him say it. But that just opened up like a whole new dialogue. But I was telling Elizabeth, and you know, she knows me well. She said, oh my gosh, I can totally feel your heat through the phone right now about how embarrassed and mortified you were about that moment. So
And even now.
oh my gosh, it is. I can totally feel it right now too. But luckily, and you know what Lamar said to us was, I can tell those are not words used in your household. I can tell this is not what you're teaching or whatever. And that's what he was excited about. And then Elizabeth said, you know, it's good and it's bad that it's bad that he has to come and say thank you for not teaching those things. You know, that's kind of the point in history where we're at. But it's also good that you guys could have had that you did get to have that dialogue, you know.
Right. Yes. Certainly.
Thank you.
I just, again, want to say that that's where I feel we're moving into is, look at us, like having conversations that may be difficult and could even become more difficult, but it's a start. And I certainly hope, I don't want to jump ahead, as Megan had some things set out, but I just hope we are able to continue having dialogue.
Go, Elizabeth, go.
Well, going off of what Elizabeth is saying, it takes a lot of courage to show up for these dialogues. It takes a lot of courage to admit these things that, you know, these oops moments and these things that have happened. And one of the things that Maria here will remember, I think, is when I talk to my students about having a conversation about race, I ask them, and I'll do this with you, how many of you are afraid of saying the wrong thing? And then I ask them, how many, and you can do this, how many of you have ever burned your hand while cooking? How many of you, because you burned your hand that one time, stopped eating and cooking? So we keep doing it. I think one of the great things about having conversations with children is that they don't have that fear yet about saying the wrong thing. So those conversations can be really fluid and generative because they're not so stuck in what to say. They're just telling you what they're thinking. And then that's a moment where we can, we have a decision to make, whether it's we have an answer or I don't know, or here's how I feel about it, and take it from there.
I think that's an amazing segue into some of the conversations that are happening in my house as well. I'm a white cisgender woman. I have a white cisgender partner, and I have a white cisgendered son. And we are having continued conversations about what it means to be white in America right now. And I caught my son writing, he's really into practicing cursive right now, and I caught him writing George Floyd in big letters in cursive on a piece of paper, and he put it on the tack board that's next to where we eat dinner. And that's usually like a place that we put up things that we're either talking about at dinner. And I was really like surprised and interested. And, my partner and I had been talking about the news. And at over dinner, my son was really interested in hearing about, what happened to George Floyd and why did the police do these things to him? And was it about slavery? And it was one of those moments as a parent where you're like, okay, here we go. All right, so let's assess. This kid is 9. How do we begin to tease apart some of these really big conversations? And to touch on what Jen had very eloquently said, when my son asks me these questions, I think my initial reaction is, oh, I hope I don't say the wrong thing. Oh, I hope I don't speak out of turn in a way that he's going to remember this moment, and this moment is going to shape his racial understanding for the rest of his life. If I don't use the right terminology in this moment, we're done for. I'm raising a racist son. I'm raising somebody who is, inappropriately reacting to what he sees on the news. And I think for me, and speaking as a business owner in a moment where right now there is a lot of interest in books about race and racism, and at the crux of all of the questions that I get from families, I would say that unequivocally, at the center of it is, how can I say not the wrong thing? Which is the book? What is the statement that unlocks the right thing to say? And I'm really scared to say the wrong thing. And I think that it is really helpful, both in situations like this and speaking with other caretakers and other parents, to say that like, ooh, that fear, that is totally something that I feel. I think it shapes a lot of what I say and I don't say. And I think that, and I hope that we continue to have these conversations throughout this chat tonight, but I think that fear can often keep us from continuing to push down into even more meaningful conversations with our kids, because we are really trepidatious. We don't want to burn our hand on the stove.
It sounds like to me, from listening to you all talk and thinking about my own experiences with my 4 white stepkids, that like our fear of saying the wrong thing needs to be something that we don't let our kids pick up on and pass on to our kids. That's not weight that our kids don't need to have hanging around their neck. So thinking about how maybe that's like a first step for some of us, for myself, to think about like my reactions and my baggage around feeling that fear and how to let that go so I don't pass that on to my kids. Elizabeth, you were mentioning something earlier that I would love for you to kind of elaborate on, if you don't mind.
Oh, which thing was that?
You were talking about the kind of advice and the thinking and the things you wanted to let us marinate on.
Okay. Actually, there are two things I'm thinking about now. So although I just want a disclaimer here, I may have the oldest children, but you know, I'm just ageless. Okay. Let's just keep that in perspective. No, I love it. Because I am also connecting with you as a mother, you know, as a mom. But anyway, so take a moment and think about your childhood and your social community. Like, you know, maybe even your high school classmates. And then just think back on who your friends were, maybe even who your parents' social community, and you know, a sense of how diverse was that. And now think about your children's social community and how has that changed. And the reason I bring this piece into it is when we talk about the fears of what we're saying, it's also what's really around us, right? How often we're engaged in diverse communities activities, which we will continue to talk about different books and the books in your library and authors. So I'm saying that to say, as we extend the circle of community or experiences, I think that offsets what we're afraid of saying or not saying. So I want to circle back to Teresa. I work with her and I have, you know, I know her. And one of the things we said in that conversation is, I felt, oh, you don't really have to worry too much about your son saying that word or that phrase, because just like the gentleman complimented you, it's like walking the walk of how you are raising your son in your household. So it's a lot of what we're thinking as parents. And I'm just saying this to take you a step back from the worry of like what we actually say. Yeah, there are going to be moments that we don't know what to say, or it may not come out, or it may be a conversation at the dinner table that doesn't go the way you expect it to go. You may reach a dead end, but it's in our living, it's in our everyday living, and this meeting here alone is big strides.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jen, I know you had a couple questions coming in. I'm going to hand off the mic to you.
Couple questions. Say that again.
You had a couple questions for Lexi and Elizabeth coming in, so toss in the mic your way.
Okay. So for Elizabeth, I had the pleasure of meeting you for the first time this weekend. And it was clear to me that you've been having conversations about race your whole career, your whole life. And you've seen different iterations of what we're seeing now, right? George Floyd is not the first Black man or Black person to be murdered. You know, just in the short span of time, we've had George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. These conversations in this moment in time seem really different. And so it feels to me as if we're in a pivotal moment. And what do you think has to be different with the conversations we're having with our children now? What has to be different in those conversations?
One of the things I was reflecting about, which I said is the other thing I was thinking, is how times change, and then how sometimes you could just look at it and things stay the same. One thing for me is technology. Access to information makes things different than even 10 years ago. The Black Lives Movement Matter became a global force, I'm sure, thanks to technology and the internet. But then some things are the same, like we're still having difficult conversations around race. There's still systemic oppression within the institutions of the United States today. So it's just interesting that in one, aspect, I feel totally charged, like, wow, we can have a Zoom platform and have an open discussion about things that we probably would not have done even last year had it not been for COVID or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like it's still a lot of work to move forward. And I wonder sometime, like when school reopens, are we just going to go back to traditional school and will everything be the same? And the students I work with certainly are not always received some equity, maybe, and that's my point of view. And so what I hope happens is, I don't want to say a call to action, but a sense of a continuation of tonight. That's something that I am looking forward to, or I'm hopeful about.
Thank you. And Lexi, I also had the opportunity and joy to just finally meet you this weekend. And I'm thinking again, this particular moment in time and history is on my mind, and how I'm seeing people who I never expected to see, kind of holding signs, reaching out, talking, wanting to learn more. And in my study of this subject, it's the dominant groups and the subordinated groups who have to work together to affect change. It's never just one-sided. As a white parent, how do you hold other white folks accountable to dismantle the system of oppression?
So I really love that question. Thanks. I think, first of all, it's like a super brave question to ask. Thank you. And I really welcome some of the other white folks on this call to chime in with some things that they're doing and they're actively participating in, because I really want this to be a possibility for some brainstorming. And so, Jen, I think the one thing that, in my experience right now, one of the things that I feel like I can do is, one, use my privilege and use my platform, however small it is as a bookstore owner, within what is a very white community, to begin to show people of color who are historically marginalized in the publishing community, marginalized in self-publishing, and bringing those stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the folks who live here. And that's a very low bar, but that is like step one, is I can bring some of these voices, up, and I can also, I'm a middle-aged grown-up, and it's really important for me also to continue to elevate the voices of folks who don't look like and don't have my experience, for these caretakers as well, because I think that is, especially in the area in which we live right here, significantly underrepresented. I also think that one of the things that I am grateful for in my own particular friend group is the relative comfort with which my friends and colleagues are able to call each other in when we are seeing behavior that we find questionable, that feels antithetical to the values that we're espousing on the signs that we put on our lawns. We have, my son even said to me, we have these signs in our windows here at the store that say, in this store, Black Lives Matter. And we have our next door neighbors have these beautiful signs on their lawn, and signs across the street from where I'm looking here right now. And my son asked a really good question the other day, and he said, it's so great that everybody has these Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns. Where are all the Black people in this neighborhood? Yeah, that's a really great question.
Your son is such a thinker. That's so good.
You know, there's a lot of talking these days. I don't know if there's a lot of talking at your house. There's a lot of talking around here. And so, you know, it's beginning to have some of these conversations about, you know, systemic oppression is a really big mouthful for a 9-year-old, but it's a conversation that in little dribs and drabs we have to begin having. And the other thing is, and I would love to hear how other white folks on this call are taking one another to task, but paying Black and brown people for their time and for their effort, and not expecting folks either on the internet or in person to be their educators, to me is paramount in this moment. I like to say that right now you should get to know Patreon super duper well and pay people for their expertise and for the time that they're putting in to educating so many white people who in this moment are really hungry for information. And so, you know, making sure that we are not dominating conversations, which sounds a little hypocritical as I continue to keep talking. So I'm going to pass the mic to anybody else who wants to share any experiences that they've had recently where they've had to, you know, as a white person, sort of continue to hold the torch. Meredith, I see your hand raised.
Okay, and I will, you know, back you on how weird it feels to take up more space as a white person in this Zoom, but I will just really quickly will say that I am in an academic moms, or several academic parent groups, and without fail, somebody every week or so will say, gosh, I want to know what to do about this problem. I have a friend who said this racist stuff. Do we still go talk to them, or it could be a family member? Wow, my uncle has said some like racist stuff, and I just don't like. We're going to meet them for Thanksgiving or whatever, and it's just so tough, and just how painful that is for every, you know, BIPOC person there to be like, do not bring this shit up ever. You know the answer, and it's almost like you are trying to get credit for even being considerate or something, like, or calling out somebody's racism, but then you're still stuck, like, you know, people will mention childlike. Well, what do I even do? Cut that person off. You know, like, this is not new. We talk about this every week, and it's like now it's in the page rules that people cannot bring that up, and we like will segue to a certain thread for white people to deal with these questions that we've already dealt with. But yeah, so that is something that comes up a lot in my life. So I'll turn the mic over.
I commend you for sharing. It's very courageous to share on any level. I thank you, Meredith.
This is the awkward wait time with Zoom.
So,
Maria?
Yeah.
Oh.
No.
My internet is cutting out a little bit, so hopefully you're hearing me. But I just know that all of my interactions are funneled through my identity as a teacher. And so I have recently been really recognizing a different sort of privilege, which is the privilege that I have. My entire higher education career was really directed at this work. And so I have years of experience of breaking down all of the socialization and all of the learning that I have done previously. And so to go into a situation where someone has not had that requires a different set of tools and a different approach. And so just as you would differentiate in a classroom, it requires a lot of differentiation when you're having these conversations. And so I have a friend who did not grow up in the US, who has a completely different cultural lens. And talking with him about these things, for one, I have to check my assumptions about what he already knows and understands, which goes also for family and friends. Like, it's been really surprising to see who knows what about everything going on, who has what opinions. So to figure out where you're at first, and then to kind of plan your attack based on that. So it might require some really base level learning. And in with that, the assumption or the understanding is always that idea of people need to learn and they need to hurry up because people are dying in the meantime. And we also need to understand that there's that, like, people have to learn. So we can't have, like, you need to be there already, but we do have to have that, gotta hurry up.
Elizabeth, you were gonna pick up the mic.
Well, I was listening to Maria, and again, thank you. I agree. I was nodding because I agree about the basic level of looking at where you are, and everyone is someplace on the spectrum. And I am from a circle of let's all respect where people are on the spectrum of this work, acceptance. And I love the idea of just being reflective of who you are and your culture. Where are your ancestors from, and then put that on the backdrop of American history.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And Jen, any advice or thinking from the research perspective, from the research side, since this is something that you've studied and thought about for years and years?
On what to do?
All of this, on all of it.
Can you, Jen, how do we fix it? Could you just make that clear? Like,
Yeah.
4 bullets.
What about some access points for parents, caregivers, families who might be afraid of these conversations, might be afraid of messing up, but want to dig into the work?
So I get a lot of that from when I teach too, is, just tell me what I have to do so I can fix it and I'll do it. It's like, no, actually it doesn't work that way. And I think the showing up, so we're taught not to talk about this. And so Lexi, when you're talking about fear, I want to ask all the parents on tonight, how many of you have witnessed your child fall? And what do they do as soon as they fall? Who do they look at? And why do they look at you?
Because they trust us the most.
And they want to know, am I okay, right? So they look at you, and my mother would say, when Ida would fall, she'd say, don't look afraid. And I'm like, okay, and just trying to look excited, because she would always look at me like, am I okay? And so if our children are looking at us and we look like we are terrified to talk about this, then we're saying basically, this is terrifying to talk about. When in my life experience, this has been such a joyful, connective thing to talk about. When two people or two groups that we're not supposed to talk about this. We're not taught intentionally to talk about this, but inherently we are connected. You see two children, any kids on a playground, and they immediately gravitate toward one another, and they're slobbering all over one another, licking each other, they're fine. But it's the parents, the grown-ups, pull them apart. You're not supposed to do that. We're putting what Maria's saying, that socialization back onto them. We've been socialized not to stare at people with disabilities, right? Ignore them, don't look. And when you don't look at that person, then they disappear. Then they're even further marginalized. So how can we, even if they're messy conversations, just get into it? Because the freeze and the not going in is not getting us anywhere. I've heard from a lot of white friends that there exists a phenomenon, which I believe, but I have not personally experienced, called white guilt. And so how I think about white guilt as a brown person is if Megan is standing across the street from me and I'm crossing the street to get to her and I get hit by a bus, and Megan is standing there saying, I feel so guilty that Jen got hit by the bus and I didn't get hit by the bus. I need you to call an ambulance. Like, I need you to do something. And just stand there and feel bad because you didn't get hit by the bus. I'm bleeding. So I think that we need to, as messy as it is, and I think that this fear of saying the wrong thing, we have to realize we can always go back and say, you know what? I thought about our conversation. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk to you about this. I really stepped in it, and I'm not here to feel better or to have you fix it. I need you to know that I did it, and I'm going to do something different. I'm going to act differently. I'm going to work differently. And I think that just starting from someplace, we have to. Otherwise, there's going to be no movement. And so there have been such moments in my classroom where I remember one student turned around, she was a student of color, and she turned around to a white student. She said, why don't you ever come to our events? I've invited you to our events and you never show up. And the rest of the class, this is like the baby falling moment. The whole class turns and looks at me like, what are you gonna do, Professor Matos? And I was feeling it. And I said, you know what? We'll put the lesson plan to the side. Let's have a conversation. She just asked you a question. How do you want to answer that? And we had a race dialogue right there. And then they went to each other's events. They had it right there, that conversation. But we can't say, oh, this is really uncomfortable and I'm going to walk away. When someone invites you into that, we have a choice to grab on and have that really messy conversation, or not at all. And it's that not at all. Racism is America's dirty, and the world's, but it's right now we're dealing with America's dirty secret. And we don't have to keep that secret. And so we get to talk about it, and we get to expose it, and we get to think about the ways in which we've kept the secret going, and how we can stop it and tell the truth.
And we all want to register for any class you're teaching now,
Yeah.
Professor Matos.
Great. What's your Patreon? Could you drop your Patreon in the chat box so we could all subscribe?
You're muted. We're just trying to stop the use of Roblox in our house. So I don't know even what Patreon is.
Jen, I felt that on my soul about the Roblox. That has been our entire argument for the whole week this week. I'm like, oh. So if anybody knows how to block specific rooms in Roblox, let me know.
We could talk after.
Okay.
I don't know how you all are feeling, but I have no idea what they're talking about. I'm feeling very, very either old and or out of touch. I was researching something last week, or actually a couple of weeks ago. It's called the 8 Seconds of Suck. And it's about how to have a hard conversation. And research says that the first 8 seconds are really going to suck, and then it gets better. You just have to suck it up for 8 seconds. Sorry, I hope no one's offended by that word, but yeah. So just think about that. If you're finding yourself like you're going into this hard conversation, no, after 8 seconds, it's going to get better. Like, it's just going to be uncomfortable for that 8 seconds. Lexi, I know you had a couple of suggestions as well of some literature that families could use as these starting points, platforms, jumping off points for conversation.
Sure thing. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I threw together just a couple slides. Don't groan. Did you groan? Let me just do this super fast. Here we go. Awesome. Thumbs up if you can see this. Great. Thanks, everybody. So I threw together some slides tonight based on a lot of the conversations that I've been having with families over the past 16 weeks or so. This global pandemic, coupled by the incredibly public police brutality that we're seeing, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in this moment, means booksellers are selling a lot of books about race and how to be a responsible parent, and I get a lot of wide-eyed stares from families. Our very small bookstore is surrounded by windows, which is really beautiful. But we decided to put a number of books in our windows that really are some of the biggest, some of our favorite books about race and racism, both historical books and just the experience of being Black and proud, or brown and proud. And so I wanted to jot down a couple thoughts tonight to share with you. And I am guessing that for the majority of us, these are not big ahas, but they might be gentle reminders for many of us. So a couple things when we're talking with children about the books that we are putting into their hands. So what we want to make sure of is that we're putting books in kids' hands that have characters, especially protagonists, that look like them, because we want kids to see experiences that mirror their own, but also kids that don't look like them. I'm sharing a couple books on each slide. Some of these are favorites from some of the mamas on our panel tonight. And if I don't want to call you out individually, but Jen, if you want to say why you love Last Stop.
I love Last Stop on Market Street because of the representation and because it comes recommended by Maria Flanders.
Yeah, we've established that Maria is the book genius, so clearly we got to get on top of this. There is a new book called This Book is Anti-Racist, written by an incredible author named Tiffany Jewell. She is also a local author here. I'm including that here. My Heart Fills with Happiness is a gorgeous, gorgeous board book for very, very young people, written by a Native author. I'm sharing this slide that has, and we'll certainly send around the link to this presentation afterwards, about this incredible presentation that author and illustrator Grace Lynn gave several years ago, also a local. She gave a beautiful TEDx talk about windows and mirrors of your kid's bookshelf, and how incredibly important it is to have that experience of letting kids see both their own life parroted back at them, and also being able to use books as a way to see into worlds that we have never ourselves experienced. This is a tricky one. We get a lot of requests. I showed the picture on this page, the story of Ruby Bridges. In the first days after the death of George Floyd, I got a surprising number of requests for the story of Ruby Bridges, which I think is just a beautiful book. If you're not familiar with it, it's gorgeous. But a lot of the books that parents started asking for, and especially white families, were these historical sort of snapshots in time featuring Black folks. And one of the immediate backlashes on social media, and I think rightly so, was that parents were real excited to like shove that spoonful of medicine in their kids' mouths when there are so many gorgeous books that feature Black and brown and people of Indigenous people of color. And that's not the point of the book. They just happen to be BIPOC. So there are, I posted here just a couple of the tweets and articles about how important it is right now to not only be exposing kids to books featuring kids of color, but really exploring the joy of being a kid of color. And we'll pass these around. The article by Nick Stone here, who herself is a young adult writer and a middle grade writer, is incredibly beautiful. I highly recommend it. As was stated, they're watching us. Our children are watching us. And so I think it's important as parents for us to be mindful of what it is that we are reading in front of our kids. What are we listening to in the car? Are the books that we're listening to right now while we're all stuck at home only authors who look and sound like us? This is an awesome opportunity to begin to integrate some authors of different cultures into our experience. We talked so much about this. We can't let fear keep us from having these conversations with kids. We can and should be talking about the racial makeup of folks who are in the books that our kids are reading. And we need to continue that conversation outside of our reading times together. Shades of People was one of our own family favorite books because it just presents, it's actually a picture book that really just shows folks of many, many different colors. And as a tiny baby, I just remember my kid like holding it up to his face and taking a look at it. Megan, I know the family book is a hot one at your house. Want to share a little bit about why?
Sure. So I actually, and I'm sorry, it's getting dark out on the porch, but again, I don't want to wake up my 1-year-old because she would be furious that I have her book in my hand. So my daughter is biologically biracial. She is adopted. She's in a family with step parents and step siblings and she has half siblings, and she is the intersection of all these beautiful things that make up her family. And so one way that we introduced her to these ideas of race and culture and families is with the family book, which we read at least 20 times a day. It's one of her favorites.
Wiggle fingers if you've seen the family book or any of the Todd Parr beautiful, beautiful books. He does an incredible job. We've touched on this, and I think it just bears repeating. There isn't going to be, and there shouldn't be, a singular conversation about race in our homes. This has to be an ongoing and consistent conversation. Like Jen beautifully said, revisit things when we feel a little icky after we walk away and feel like we've sort of overstepped or understated or maybe misspoke about something, or when we have that kind of cringy feeling about an interaction that maybe our kids saw. That's a great time to admit to your child, whether it has to do with a kid's picture book or something a little bit broader. We have to be willing to be vulnerable for our children, specifically because they're going to model that back to us, and they're going to continue to see us making those choices. Jen, I know love was a big hit at your house also. Let's see. This is a slide, and I'm excited to share it afterwards with some of my favorite resources for choosing diverse kids books, just a couple, and some tags to follow both on Instagram and on Twitter. There are incredibly talented folks doing really, really important work. And as a bookseller, as a parent, as a person who cares deeply about equality, I feel like these are just a small sampling of brilliant minds who are putting out excellent recommendations, not only for diverse children's books, but on ways to continue having honest and truly important conversations right now. They're all pretty good.
Thanks, Lexi. And we will share these resources, these book lists with you all tomorrow. And if you're watching via Facebook Live, we'll put them on the thread and on the Tailored Learning Supports Facebook page. So we have a great question. I'm also realizing it's 8:50, so if you need to go attend to your kids or your life, feel free. We'll share the recording afterwards. I'd like to stick around a little bit longer if you can. I'm also realizing I'm like the floating head. There we go. We have a great question in the chat box. Could we hear from a couple of Black and brown mamas of color, about what they feel the white mama should be highlighting? And feel free to pick up the microphone. I'm going to turn my microphone off. And if you don't know how to turn on your microphone, if you toggle the bottom toolbar, you'll see a little microphone button where you mute and unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So I think that, well, first let me just say that I appreciate so much this discussion. Just the fact that you are at the discussion is noteworthy, I think, for this time period or any other time period, quite frankly. So I put this question in here because I think that, excuse me, it's important for us, for everybody concerned, no matter what ethnicity, to keep, I guess, a proper perspective about what it is we're trying to do because everyone is going to have different objectives um, in this thing. I hate to keep using the word work because that has a certain connotation, but in this stuff that we're about right now, everybody's objectives might be a little bit different. But from the perspective of an African American mother who's raised two African American men, maybe the thing that I will say, given the time that I have right now, is we want to be normalized. We want for white families to normalize Blackness and Latinxness. And I'm sorry, I'm not saying all the different sub-ethnicities, but normalize Asianness, normalize something other than whiteness, because that is the base from which all of these things, these negative things that we see operates. Because white is centered as what's normal, as what's right, as what's good, as what's expected, it is established as the standard. That is the base from which you get ideologies that say, therefore, if someone is Black, if someone, it basically fill in the blank, if you are not white, then you are not those things that white is. You are not good. You are not beautiful. You are not normal. You are not the standard. And so, however, I don't like to get into necessarily trying to give too much specifics about how and when and all of that, but I just offer that as a base upon which to build and say, start by considering how in your family, how in your own mind and heart, how in the places that you work, in the social circles that you participate in, how can you be someone who projects and who positions themselves as believing that humanity is what's normal, that humanity is what is the standard. And there are different ways of being human. So there's Black human, there's Asian human, there's Latinx human, there's all, there's Native American and Indigenous human. All of these things are the standard, because then your children will begin to understand that when they see someone who is not white being treated in a way that is not right, they will not overlook it, because they'll recognize right away that's wrong, because they're just, they're normal too. I mean, they're human too. They're whatever you fill in the blank too. A lot of this comes from the fact that we accept the disparate treatment because we haven't grounded in ourselves the belief, like at a heart bedrock level, anything that is not white is not right. We have not forcefully enough resisted that ideology, and we kind of go along with it. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna be honest, Black people do it too. We internalize some of these things, and we internalize, some of these negative stereotypes, and as Black moms, sometimes we have to deal with it. I had a son who was in a white private school, and for months in middle school, he came home every single day complaining about his hair. He had all of this goop, like gel and crap in his hair, and he kept saying, my hair is not right. It doesn't stick up straight, or it won't lay down straight. And I'm like, it's never going to do that. And that is okay, because the kids at his school had never been taught that Black hair is just as right as white hair. So wrapping up, that's what I would ask, that you make that a bedrock of what you're trying to build upon, is that whiteness is not the center of anything, that humanity is what is normal. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Chandra. I appreciate.
No problem. No problem. I'm just, and I hope no one feels like I'm trying to lecture or anything, but I'm just trying to, I just want us to be real about what it is we're doing and what it is we're trying to do, and not be not continue to operate on these matters at a surface level. Like, don't just keep reciting things that we hear in the blogosphere, in the cybersphere. Don't do that. Just talk about what is real and what is really going to work, because some of these things, like, everybody is not ready to start reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, just honestly. They're not ready. Because they've never learned how to be, an anti chauvinist, or an anti, polygamy, or anti whatever. That's just not where they are. And so they may have to start somewhere else. And that's okay. But for God's sake, let's be honest about where we are. If you're white and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. At this point, I would rather you just say something. Then at least we can get a conversation going. We can start some dialogue. Maybe we'll end up having to agree to disagree, and I'm okay with that. But it's the non-action and the just being not talking, not acting, not thinking, not speaking. That is really, I think, deleterious.
That was so refreshing. Thank you.
Now I have a word to Google. Deleterious. Okay.
You're killing me. Hysterical. And I'll be honest with you, the way I'm presenting myself right now is literally the way I act with my sons. And I have to be patient, because a lot of the things that people say, like, oh, I'm like, how do we talk? I've never had that question about anything, because I have always said to my sons, even if you come in here and you have to confess that you just shot somebody, I'm gonna like have a reaction, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to listen to you. And we're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to work it through. And that's really the attitude I wish we could get to. Like, we don't have to agree right out of the box. We probably won't. I've been through some crap that you could never imagine. But guess what? Maybe so have you. So I just want us to start talking and listening and just working it through. Don't everybody back up and back out, as soon as somebody says something bad or something wrong or something you don't agree with, whatever. Don't just, drop the ball. Just stay there and look mad if you have to, say some stuff if you need to, but then just hang in there and just keep talking. Just keep working, keep teaching, keep writing, whatever it is you do, just keep doing it, because it makes progress. I've had to talk to my sons about some tough stuff. My youngest son, who's 24, had a cop draw a weapon on him. And that was a heart-stopping moment. And I realized, even though he tried to play it off, that really traumatized him. So we had to work it through. I'm crying. He's trying to not cry, but we had to work it through. So to me, it's like the same thing. If you say, you know what, I just don't get it. I don't get all this stuff. I don't know what all this is about. I will listen to that, and we can talk about it. But if you say nothing, and I see that your kids come out in the open and they're acting a certain way, I'm going to look at you. And I'm going to say, wow, I wonder what's happening there. That's why I'm writing about that now, because I want white people, again, this is my honesty, I want white people to get some skin in the game. I want you guys to not act like this isn't your issue, like it's not your problem. Because, we've all heard that story. It's all well and good when the fire is at the house 2 doors down, but I guarantee, if you don't get a bucket of water, it's going to hit your house.
So we all want to take Chandra's course now too.
Yes.
I'm going to stop. Oh, baby's awake. I'm going to stop recording, but feel free. I'm going to grab my baby and we'll continue the conversation unrecorded.
I had a comment that I wanted to make to everyone and like ask or whatever. I feel as a parent that, and this is something that I'm realizing about myself, I have done such, I think, a great job of normalizing a man can marry a man, a woman can marry a woman, you know, transgender. I feel like I've brought that into our house, and that's something normal.